the churches that we see being the most successful as far as like, creating that type of kingdom culture where it's very like evangelistically positioned. And because it's like, so evangelistically positioned, they're also at the same time like seeing that it's not just a focus on evangelism, but because they're empowering students to go have these conversations, discipleship is happening at a rate that goes beyond what we could if we were just standing up on a stage teaching them all these different things from scripture and hoping that it's like staying in their mind. We're seeing that like evangelism and discipleship is like two sides of the same coin basically. And that if we can empower them and equip them with a tool to go be evangelistic in their communities, that discipleship is naturally going to happen as well. So all the way to where like what we've really noticed is at the sweet spot is that when youth ministry leaders are willing to say, all right, hands off the wheel, I'm giving this over to my student-led Alpha Youth.
What is going on, youth leaders? This is a very special episode with Josh Penwell of Alpha USA, who dives right into the state of youth ministry today, of what students are facing in our world right now, but more importantly, how we can reach them with the message of Jesus, and just some amazing stories of what Alpha is doing, what Alpha Youth specifically can do for you in your youth ministry. So I hope that this episode blesses you. It was a huge encouragement and a challenge for me to think about how I am challenging my students to reach friends for Jesus right where they are, where God has placed them. So check it out. I hope it's a great blessing to you. What's your typical, like if you have an open morning as far as like spiritual practice, that kind of stuff, like what does that typically look like for you?
That's good. Well, right now, I'm doing this new thing where instead of trying to like, okay, so I'm an Enneagram 3. So I'm usually like very tempted to be like, yeah, I'm going to crank through the Bible every year and like read it like, from cover to cover. Cause it's like, this little like star of achievement, and so this year I'm trying really hard. I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to pick 2 books and I'm going to read them on repeat. So I'm reading through John and Romans, over and over. And like, I've like given myself permission this year. Those are the 2 books I'm just camping out in them. And going to just continue reading through them and asking the Lord to just like reveal new things to me every time when I read through them. So yeah, that's what that's been looking like lately.
What's been your revelation so far? What's been a nugget?
Yeah. So I think that like, man, if I'm being so honest, like it was just really easy starting in 2020. Like I'm sure like all of us felt that, right? Like it was just like, everything just felt dry. Like ministry felt dry. It felt like relationships felt dry because we couldn't have them in a lot of ways, at least not in the ways that we wanted to for quite a while there. And it feels like in every area, things just like started to feel dry. So I've been kind of like over the last couple of years on this journey back to like, just like wanting to like fall in love with like Jesus again in the ways that like, that I remembered before 2020, which I know like maybe that sounds like so weird, but I was just like, I want to just like focus on him, focus on like his actions and his practices, and look for the ways that I can continue to just like try to model his actions in my own life. So those have been some of the things that have been like really like at the focus for me lately.
Yeah. I mean, I think especially because of what you do, like, I mean, like Alpha's about evangelism. It's about telling people about Jesus, it's about sharing the good news. And I think it just is what it is. Like, it's really hard to keep your fire hot for that kind of stuff when you're not just like deeply in love with Jesus yourself, right? Like, it's so easy to feel like it's hard to be really, passionate when you're like, I don't feel passionate, but I need to be because of what I'm responsible for, which I think is something like every person in ministry ever, whether you're a small group leader or a pastor or whatever, can relate to. I don't know if that's actually true, but I relate to that often, at times where just like every relationship that comes and goes. But I think that's huge, man. I'm just like going deep and, just sitting, and it's hard to not, like you almost have to sit in, but, chapters like John 15, like I'm the vine, you're the branches, like, whoever remains in me bears much fruit.
Yeah.
Like, how do you gotta just sit there for a while, right?
Yeah. And it's crazy because like, for 10 years, it was like, if you ever are like, running into like, what feels like maybe like, a dry spell or something in ministry, it was like, well, you know what? Something just happened in youth ministry, like, you see like, a student give their life to Jesus. You see a student like, decide to like, get baptized. They're like, inviting friends. Like you see them like, taking next steps in their own faith. And some of that is like, it just like, it can't, like, you can't help but like, feel like stirred up by that. And it's just like a really big shift that I've noticed is that like in this last year and a half at Alpha, we get to hear about those stories, but like from a distance. So like, I have like, places where like, I'm volunteering and like, getting connected, like, with young people, but like those like, weekly recurrences of like, this student just made this decision and this student made this decision. Like those are much fewer and further between for me personally now. And that was something I just wasn't prepared for a year and a half ago, stepping into this role that like, oh man, I'm going to miss that. So yeah, it's been a journey. It's been wild, but, I'm excited for all the stuff that's happening with Alpha right now. There's some really exciting things coming down the line, and excited to see like, what God continues to do with it. So
Okay, so just to make sure I'm on the same page, Alpha, like what is it? What do you guys do? Talk me through a little bit of the mission, the vision,
yeah.
and kind of what attracted you to it and got you plugged in with them versus, pursuing ministry other places, or kind of getting off the track of what you had done before.
Yeah. So our whole thing is that we want to equip the church to help young people discover and develop a relationship with Jesus. Like that's the whole thing. And like, we do that through like, a number of different ways, mainly through resources and products. Like, the Alpha Youth series, we're really passionate that we want to give everything away for free. So like when you go on the website, you're going to see like, there's nowhere in there where it's like, just pay this amount and then you get access to this. Like, we have really like, amazing donors and partners across the globe that they're a part of that like passion as well. So they do whatever they can do. And we make sure that we are always giving all of our best resources away for free. And then we have lots of different experiences. So whether it's like, hopping into a city for like, a 1-day event, doing cohorts that like, journey with youth ministry leaders over the course of 5 months. I just spent a weekend in LA with 20 youth ministry leaders from the US and Canada who all came together for an experience together, which was incredible. And that was kind of like the kickoff of our 5-month journey. So that's been really cool. And then the final thing is through curious conversations. We think that a lot of really good things happen in the mind of a young person if we can like first initially get that spark of curiosity about their faith. And then just, of course, like, creating those, helping youth ministry leaders create spaces where curious conversations can take place. So there's like, the three, like, main things that we're trying to go after and trying to provide for the church. Yeah. And so really that's like the main, that's the main thing right now. Like our big goal that we're going after is, we have new leadership within the last year and a half, which I'm excited for. I don't really know any different because I kind of came in with like some of that new leadership. And the big goal at the moment is that we're going to see 5 million young people go through the Alpha Youth series over the next 10 years.
Wow.
So it's a very lofty goal, but we believe in a really lofty God who's capable of doing that. And we're super excited to see that come to fruition.
Yeah. I'm curious at your training you just did in Los Angeles, like
Yeah.
kind of recap the vision casting part of that.
Oh,
If I'm,
yeah.
I would love to hear like what are some of the stories you shared and just ways that you're like reminding youth pastors like what we are invited to do in this work of reaching the nations and reaching the world for Christ is worth it all.
Yeah, for sure. I'm gonna be so honest. It was just 2 weekends ago, and it's probably been like the highlight of like what I've been able to do in the last year and a half of my job. It was so great. And like this isn't a plug. But it's called Circles and Spaces. That's like the name of the cohort that people hop into. And our whole thing with them is that, man, like youth ministry has just been like, it's always been hard, but the last few years have been the hardest. Like, the numbers, like, are saying like, youth ministry leaders have been dropping like flies, for lack of better, like, analogy in the last, few years. There's never been like this big of a shortage of youth ministry leaders in the country. And the ones who are still in it, they're either brand new. So they're trying to like just get their feet wet with like, what am I doing here? Or they're like, the long timers, the vets who are like, this has been tough. And no matter what, whether they're brand new or whether they are like, been through all of it, for these last few years. The thing that has been true as we're interacting with them is that they're just like, we feel tired. We feel just
Yeah.
like it's just really, really hard right now. It feels like every church we're talking with, they're like, the numbers aren't what they were in 2019. All of like, the things that they used to celebrate, they're like, we have to figure out new things to celebrate because the wins that used to be wins now don't really feel like wins. And the things that we used to be able to do that felt like success, now we're just like, is that actually still successful? So people are like refiguring out measurements. And it's just like, some people love innovating. And we were noticing that like, the people who love innovating, they're like, this is like their sweet spot. But for so many
Yeah.
people, they were like, I had it figured out. Like I thought that I knew what I was doing. I was
Yeah.
just getting my feet under me, and then the rug got ripped out. And now they're having to relearn. So this whole cohort was basically us saying, let's bring people together and like let's just like really pour into them, give them some really awesome like experiences together of just like building connections and relationships with other youth ministry leaders throughout the country and throughout Canada. And then so we did things like, we have some really good friends who live in LA, who like, their whole thing is like helping ministry leaders understand what it looks like to be reliant on the Holy Spirit. So, and like, for some ministry leaders, that's a really like scary place to be. Cause I mean, like, for me specifically, I love to have control, and like, the whole idea of like, reliance on the Holy Spirit puts you in this place where it's like, I have to relinquish control in order to trust that God is going to like, work and do something outside of maybe what I planned or what I put in PCO and planning center, all that stuff. Right. So half of our ministry leaders were there and they were like, oh, this is so good. This is like giving me language for things that I already practice. And the other half were like, whoa, this feels new and this feels challenging. And it was just really good to be able to like provide them with that experience, for them to have curious conversations with one another. That was our whole thing. We told them, come into the weekend just being curious. And, if you hear things that maybe go outside of your normal church context, like that's okay. And it doesn't mean that it's wrong, but just walk into it being curious about what God could be up to in your own life. We spent the second day at Fuller Youth Institute with their team, talking through some of their new research that they've been doing, Faith Beyond Youth Group, which is really incredible study that they just wrapped up. They just released a book around that. They're some of our good friends. So we just got to spend a day with them, getting poured into about like what all the, even like, some of the discouraging numbers that are out there, like just for us to have awareness of like, this is the state of the church right now. This is the state of youth ministry.
What were some of those statistics and stats that were alarming for you? I'm really curious, because I feel like I'm always like, I know the Barna stuff comes out and I'm like, okay, yeah. I don't want to get too like, I just needed to keep doing what I need to be doing. Yeah. But it's really sometimes sobering and important to stop and look at data like that. So I'm just curious, was there any specific numbers or metrics or trends that you're like, this is shocking to me and everyone needs to be aware of this? I need to be aware of this.
Yeah. So to kind of like rewind a little bit, like, a few years ago, Alpha, we did some research with Barna about like reviving evangelism in the next generation. And like we started getting like, a peek into some of the trends that were happening there. And something that we noticed was that trust between young people and the church was deteriorating at a pretty like alarming rate. And then we did another study called the Open Generation, where again, we like, got kind of like more evidence of that, and seeing that it's not that their trust in Jesus or openness to Jesus is declining. It's that their trust and openness to Christians and Christian relationships was declining. And they're saying like, I see people claiming to be Christians, but I also see their actions. And it doesn't seem to match the character of Jesus that you talk about. And even if they're reading about him, they're like, this isn't matching. So they're like, the trust wasn't there. So like some like the thing that like, when you're in a room and you're hearing stuff and like you get that moment where everyone's like, oh shoot. One of the things that got brought up was that in some of the new studies, they saw that trust between Gen Z, trust between young people in general, and and police and politicians are at an all-time low, but their trust in the church is even beneath that. And that this is the lowest level of trust that young people have ever had in organized religion. And we're just like, man, what do we need to do in order to like overcome this trust barrier that currently exists? Because I mean, like, when did you ever have a significant moment with anyone that you didn't trust? Like, that's just not a thing that happens. So that was definitely a thing that everyone was like, this is really tough. And we had lots of conversations about how we're going to try to tackle that. So
Yeah, that's alarming, but
yeah,
also I think it's helpful sometimes to remember, like, okay, this is reality. Like, we have this vision to reach all these people, but to have reach 5 million students for Christ, or have them at least
yeah,
at a minimum go through your evangelism gospel sharing program.
yeah,
But the reality is, most people don't trust us enough to even get in the door or to
true.
ever show up to something. So,
Yeah,
I mean, even just talking a little strategy, like how did you guys talk about that, and how would you even encourage other people listening to this, youth leaders, small group leaders, youth pastors, um, youth leaders listening that are struggling with the same thing, feeling like I feel that trend that kids aren't opening up very much,
mm,
that they're in and out and very skeptical. I mean, I've seen that over and over again, even in our youth ministry. But how have you kind of coached youth pastors and encouraged them around that sticking point of building trust with skeptical students and the
yeah,
skeptical next generation, who's not just of the church but of institution?
yeah. I will say this, that like, something I really believe in is like, trying to like best understand the context of any youth ministry leader, and the way that we would approach this conversation with someone who's in like, downtown New York City is very different than how we would interact with someone who's like, in rural Nebraska. So I'm gonna be speaking in like, very like, large, just like general statements and stuff. And so just like take that with like a grain of salt. Okay. So the big thing
Yeah,
though
yeah,
the big thing that we're saying, the big thing that we're noticing is that, all right, so like go back with me to like before COVID, right? Which I hate that like that's just like the defining moment. It's everything was either before COVID or after COVID, but like before it, dude, like it felt like youth ministry could be successful if you could draw a large crowd. And if you could do something to like just be like, let me get this perfect shot in the back of the room, post it on Instagram, and like, here's what it is, right? Like it was very events driven, very like come and see and come and like hang out, come and be a part of this thing, this new fun thing that we're doing. And in a lot of ways and in a lot of places, that was almost like the defining marker for success within youth ministry, was like, how many students can you get to show up to your next thing? And I know that like, there's obviously a crowd of people that are like, I've always pushed back against that. And that's okay. That's totally okay. But in a lot of spaces, for better or worse, that was kind of like a mark of, are you doing well? And what we're seeing now is that the whole idea that we're going to be able to do anything at our churches specifically that are going to draw students out of the woodwork and say, yeah, let me come hang out here as like a first step. That's like very rarely the first step for students now. And what we're seeing is that like, because of this deteriorated trust between young people and the church, we've got to figure out, how are we not telling them like, you need to come to us and come to our thing and come show up and put your butt in our seat and watch our program. But instead, how are we going to empower the young people that currently already here in order to go and be and like, take the news of Jesus
Hmm.
to their friends? And like, man, in youth ministry in 2019, for me, that for me always felt like that was like the thing that we were encouraging student leaders to do. It was like, your cream of the crop, the students that like, they just got it. It was like, okay,
Right.
you're the ones, we're going to empower you to go to your school and to like lead an after school study, to get involved in a, like, an after school program there. And you're going to be the ones that talk about Jesus to your friends. And now we're realizing we have to flip that. We have to
Yeah.
empower every student who is a part of our ministries right now and say, it's all of you. All of you are going out to your schools. All of you are going to your clubs, to your sports, to all the different teams that you're on. And you're going to be the ones who are sharing Jesus with your friends. And hey, like, I'm here. And if it's ever, and if it like, if it makes sense for your student, for, your friends to like come here, like we're always going to provide something. We're always going to provide a space. But yeah, I think that we've got to start looking at empowering students, not as like
Mm.
a final step, but it has to be like one of the basic building blocks.
Well,
And
and I
that's
think isn't that just biblical? Like, I did like a house church evangelism training course, and the guy was this little Taiwanese guy who was a part of this huge house church movement in
100%.
China, and he
Yeah.
said, he's like, most of the time we put all the missionary work on them. You
Hmm.
come to us. He says,
Yeah.
Great Commission says we go to you.
Yeah.
He's like, we've had it wrong for a long time.
Absolutely.
Like, or I've heard it said with the Matthew 4:19. Jesus says, "Come follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men."
Hmm.
Before they even really followed Jesus, they knew being evangelistic was part of the process.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like we like hold that back for years. It's like we'll wait until you're like student leader, or we'll wait until you're really discipled, then we'll challenge you to evangelism, rather than be
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
some of your best evangelists are people who aren't even saved yet.
Yeah.
Like they're people who are hanging out with other lost people. They're like just ingraining day one, which I think it's funny. Like your organization's called Alpha because like that's like the name of the generation that we're working with now. And I think one of the most exciting things about this sort of like Gen Alpha that we get to work with now is like, at least I'm seeing, is they're almost like spiritual raw material.
Mm.
They're like the amount of the kids that are coming, and we have a pretty successful large group ministry at our church that's very
Yeah.
evangelistic, and we have a lot of
Mhm.
first time guests and have had a lot of momentum in the last few years, which praise God for that, in our team and in our students who have been just huge inviters and very evangelistic by nature.
Sure.
But I feel like the kids that are coming are like completely biblically illiterate. They're
Mm.
completely, you know, I did this on Wednesday. We talked about Daniel in the lion's den. I said,
Mm.
how many of you guys have heard this story? And I probably saw like a quarter of the hands in the room of about 200 students go up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, here are all these kids that have just no clue these like basic Bible fundamentals. And I
Mhm.
know that's some of your story too, like having not really grown up in the church very much. Like, that's not just generational now, but I feel like across the board, like it's can be really discouraging, but at the same time, like really exciting. So I don't know, I'm curious how you've seen some of those trends, and hearing as you're working with youth pastors around the country and different churches, like hearing some feedback come of maybe the spiritual interest and excitement of students in the generation that they're working with now. So would love to hear some perspective and encouragement that you guys give the teams that you work with about generation Alpha now, not just on the negative side of, hey, they're skeptical of the
Sure. Yeah.
church, but
Yeah.
also like the flip side of that is now we can move really quick. But I'm curious to your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So many things, but like first, I appreciate you just like acknowledging that like they really, it just feels like like raw material that we're working with at this point. That was me. And like if I'm looking back even to like my senior year of high school was the year that I like really put my faith in Jesus. That what ended up happening was that like what led me to that place of feeling like I could put my faith in Jesus was the fact that like I was actually given places where I could ask questions. I had a youth pastor who was like hanging out with me, taking me to get coffee, buying me food and everything, which if youth ministry leaders don't have that built into their budget, like you got to figure that out. Free food, man, that's a game changer for people trying to figure out questions about Jesus.
It's
But
everything. Like
right,
you got like you have to get that budget. You have to get that approved. I think that should be the standard everywhere. But
yeah,
like,
absolutely. But
need it.
yeah, so like but like that wasn't true for so many people. That's not true for most people right now. We hear oftentimes young people, and not even young people, but even just like older people that are like new to faith walking in, and it feels like, ooh, I'm supposed to meet the bar that is set here. I'm supposed to be on the same level as everyone here. And it can be intimidating. And it can be like, where do I actually go to ask questions? And like when they're having that like initial spark of curiosity where they're like, I am curious, I do have questions about Jesus and about faith and about church and all the things that we read about. I have questions about Daniel and the lion's den. Like, where do they go to actually ask those questions? And I think that like the more that we can start setting up our youth ministries to be places not where we just like talk at them and tell them this is what you need to know, but actually providing spaces where we say, okay, ball's in your court. Tell us what are you wondering? What are you curious about? And let's just like make that shift. I know
And I'm
like
sure it's probably interesting what comes out. One of the other episodes I did for this show, you could go back and listen of with Josh Griffin, who's Download Youth Ministries and
yeah.
was at Saddleback for forever and at Mariners now. He was like, they polled their students a couple of years ago. He was like so shocked. He's like, kids were asking about. He said the number one topic kids were curious about was war.
Mm,
Like why, like how do we reconcile like what's happening in the world? He's like, I never would have expected that. I thought kids would have talked about bullying or sex
yeah.
or whatever. He's like, and not that those weren't things that kids were curious about, but like the number one thing was like violence in the world,
Mm,
and like these deep questions of like, how does God let this happen, and why does he let this happen, and what about war in the Bible, and how does God, like how do we reconcile that? And
yeah.
it was just so interesting to hear, like, I'm sure, like you said, when you ask, like kids will
Yeah.
respond and give you some amazing feedback. So sorry I interrupted you. It just
No, no,
jogged
no.
me of like, man, the questions that kids are asking now, are not always what we would expect, and especially I feel like the older I get, now that I'm like 30, I'm like, man, I feel like I'm like, what? I think about trying to get in the mind of a seventh grader. I'm like, man, we're just living in different worlds in some ways.
Yeah, yeah. No, and like, we tell youth ministry leaders all the time. It's like, we will share things, like, we'll share facts and data, all the things that, we find out about young people collectively, whether it's in the US or across the globe. But we're like, man, like, don't just take what we're saying, and say like, this is like, what has to apply to all of my students, but like, go to your students and actually ask them, what are the things that, you want to talk about? What are the things that you're interested in? Because, one of the things in our open generation study that we did, we actually asked young people. We said, we want to know, what are the things you're most interested in talking about in the church? So this was like 25,000 young people across the globe that we did this survey with. And the top 5 things that came to the surface for this study was racial injustice, extreme poverty, human trafficking, global climate change, and mental health issues. And there were so many youth ministry leaders that were like, climate change? Like, how do I talk about this? And I'm like, yeah, I know. Like, I personally, after 10 years in youth ministry, I never taught a sermon on global change. I never like tried to create that space. But what we're hearing from them is they're saying like, hey, like, don't just like tell me the things that you think, or maybe even that that I need to know, but like, just give me a space first to ask the questions about the things I'm most curious about. And I think that if we can start shifting that mentality to be like, we're going to make space for their questions, then eventually will come the moment when they're going to have questions about the things that like we're like eager to give them answers to about Jesus,
Yeah. What do you think that looks like practically? And maybe some of this is just your opinion too, or some things
Yeah.
that you've seen, but like on a week to week, like how do you practically get feedback from students to know how to target your teaching and focus that? Which could be really, really hard, other than, hey, we're going to sit in a room and we're going to plan curriculum for the next 6 months. And I guess we're just going to kind of hit the checkpoints that we think are important.
Yeah.
We're going to hit our normal scope and sequence.
Yeah.
Yeah, practically, what maybe some wisdom and thoughts for youth pastors to chew on, like, hey, I would be doing these things to get that feedback, to understand where your kids are and what they really need in order to bridge the gospel to them.
Yeah. So, I mean, dude, the fact that you just dropped a scope and sequence, man, like, hear this as like, this is not like judgment if anyone is doing anything differently, but like, I was a youth ministry leader who, like, you could have come to me and said, hey, what are you teaching 3 years and 4 months from today? And I could have pulled up my document and told you, this is what's slated for that point, because we've got it all mapped out for the next 4 years. And if anyone would have come to me and said, we got to flip the script, we got to talk about this other thing that's popping up, I would have been like, really? Because I've already got a plan. I've already got my strategy in place. Like, it's systematized. Like, everything is good to go. Don't mess with it.
I feel like most youth pastors are either like really that way, or like, I'll pray, and then like, all right, my youth's on Wednesday, and by Friday, maybe Monday morning, I'll kind of like, we should probably hit, it's like, that's hard, right? To be like, how do you be spirit led and, teach, all the continents of scripture, like that challenge,
For sure.
that's hard to do.
Yeah. So like, I don't, like, again, I think this comes back to like, what's your context? How are your students? How open are they to like, conversations and stuff? Like, I know that there are youth ministry leaders I'm talking with right now who they're like, our small groups culture is just not there. So if I went and said, hey, have all your small group leaders in small group, just say to your students, what questions do you have about faith? What questions do you have about Jesus or anything in between? They would say like, we would just get crickets. Like, there would be nothing there. And I'm like, okay, I feel that. I get that. So let's lower the bar in that situation, make the stakes even lower. We know that high stakes are not something that this generation is about. Like, real quick, even just like a tangent. If your games are so high stakes that it feels like they're about to lose credibility in front of their friends, it's not a game worth doing. Like, keep the stakes is so low for this generation. Anyway.
And some of that too is like, not all small groups are the same.
Sure. Yeah.
Like we were leaving, our 6th grade girl group, our leader was like, we had a great night. We had 27 girls in there. And I was like, and they kind of subdivide into smaller pockets of like 10, 8, 6, whatever. But I was like, that is not a small group.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if you pitch a hey, what's a deep fear you have, or like insecurity in your faith or doubt?
Yeah,
Me in front of 28 six girls and my four leaders, I'm just going to be super vulnerable right now. I'm like,
it's
that's
not
probably
happening.
never going to happen, let alone
Not
with
a chance.
like the psychology of girls and boys, like young men with like dealing
For
with
sure.
like that, like real deep insecurity of like not wanting to be weak, like, which is a
Yeah.
fundamental part of Christianity, of like laying your life down and being vulnerable to the Lord. Like, that's a really hard psychological jump to make, I feel like,
Mhm.
especially for young men who
Yeah.
are dealing with that. So, but one of the cool things that I noticed, and I want to get back to your perspective too. It just jogged my memory that I thought COVID, and all the bad things when we were online in that season, um, and since then, since whenever we do this, like oftentimes, like we would have a stream, and on YouTube, like the nature of like kids in the room kind of sitting there, you're like, are they even paying attention, rather than like the
Mm.
devotional happening and pitching a question in our online talk and seeing the chat just go, and it's just like, oh, it's because they're digital natives.
Yeah.
They feel so much more transparent and open online. They feel so much more transparent and open behind a
Mhm.
keyboard. Or we once this semester we'll have a student night, and we'll have typically a panel of students, or a panel, a kind of mixture of leaders and students, up sharing their testimony and talking about a difficult topic that students are facing. Like this last time was about students getting up and sharing like seasons of hardship in their faith,
Mm.
whether it was like doubt that they've had, or a trial that they went through that God walked them through.
Yeah.
And we just put a text in, like a Google number, up on the screen,
Yeah.
like, hey, and then I was up there moderating on my app, my iPad, and I was like, I probably had 150 different kids text in,
Yeah.
and I'm like, the engagement and the lean in, and like the focus, and the like that interactivity of like, I can participate and I can ask a question, and like some of the questions, I was like, it was like breaking my heart, like reading
Mhm.
some of them that they wanted answered that we didn't
Absolutely.
have time to.
Yeah.
So I'm like, man, like, it's not that those questions aren't in there.
Mhm.
So now, from your guys' perspective, what are some other ways, I just shared a couple of ours, but what are
You know,
ways to get that, extract some more of that out of students in your programming that you might already be doing, or online things, from what you guys are seeing?
yeah, yeah. So, okay, ideal thing here is like we've got to establish the relationships. When we have the relationships, that's where trust can be gained, where trust can be built. That's like the biggest thing that is like working against so much of what we're trying to do in the church right now. However, we know that for a lot of churches, man, like not only are the youth ministry leaders new, but also so many students that are in there right now, like they're also newer to faith. So a lot of them are working from like this level, like, ground zero of trying to establish trust. So what you just said about like, there's different apps, there's different softwares that you can use, connect it to all your stuff and make it so students can text in. We've like, talked to youth ministry leaders that like, there's like this integration through Twitter, sorry, not Twitter, X, where like, you can do that same thing. And I was like, that's wild that like in certain places in the country, there are still high schoolers who are using X, but it's happening. So,
You're
so
more conservative. You're more conservative, kids.
yeah, for
You're
sure.
Texas. I'm in Kansas. Kids who are like, yeah, X, last
Yeah,
bastion of digital freedom.
yeah.
Not really, but
but and then but then like there's so many youth ministry leaders that like, when we're talking about those ideas, like, hey, get the app, get the platform where you can do this and have this built into like a regular rotation, like, end every teaching series with a conversation where that is like totally built on the questions that students submitted over the first 2 to 3 weeks of your teaching series.
that's really cool.
But then for a lot of our youth ministry leaders that are like, guys, you want me to get an app and software? I'm working with an empty room and no TV. And I'm like, cool. Put a box in the front of the room. And then if you want to go like one step further, give every student a piece of paper, give them a pen, and tell them, even if you don't write anything down, all of you get up at this point and go put your paper in the box. Because what we've heard is that so many times when they, youth ministry leaders, they do this. They'll say, if you have a question, write it down and put it in the box. But then the feedback we get from young people is they're like, I don't want to be the first one. I don't want to be the person that goes up and makes it obvious that I have a question. So just say the stakes are low. Everyone's going to get up and go put their paper in the box. And you know what? Some of them might not have questions written down, and that's okay. But you made it a safe place for everyone to feel like they can go up and put a paper in, and some of them are going to have questions on there, which is great. So we've just like got to start creating easy ways for students to just be honest about what their questions are. Also, I want to highlight you mentioning, if you're going to use the app, you got to have a moderator. You got to have someone who's just like sifting through the stuff that comes in before you throw it up on a screen. You've heard so
Oh
many
yeah.
horror stories of people who are like, oh, we just trust them to do it. I was like, don't do that. Don't.
No, I was with a group of kids who were talking about that. They're like, one of the girls who was like, "Hey, did you like see the YouTube link I sent?" I'm like, I am never gonna open up a hyperlink or image or video that a child will send me on it. I'm like, are you kidding me? I was like, you think, especially not when I'm moderating the panel, kid. I,
Yeah, yeah,
it's like, this is just future wisdom for you, child. If you're ever moderating a panel, never do that.
yeah, for sure, for sure. So yeah, but I think that like just in general, man, it's all coming back to like how are we establishing trust with
Yeah.
the people in our ministries right now? If they don't trust the person in the front, if they don't trust the small group leader, if they don't trust the church that they're sitting in, their willingness to participate and to actually ask their curious questions it's gonna plummet significantly. So we've got to work to overcome some of those things, and a lot of that is gonna happen. It's gonna happen over time. It's gonna happen by like you continuing to like just show up and be like present and to be available to them. It's gonna like all the things that like that we've learned over the years within youth ministry that are just like kind of those basic building blocks to establishing trust with young people when they are going to try their absolute best to test you and to just be on their phones, acting like they're not listening to you, to just be like, messing around with their friends when you're like in the middle of just like really getting to like that sweet spot in your message. And you're just like in those moments when you can be like, I'm going to choose grace, I'm going to choose love, and I'm going to choose to like accept them just as they are right now, as opposed to being the person who like calls them out and being the person who like, tries to shame them for like not acting the way that you want them to act, doing everything that you can to just be like, hey, you're accepted as you are, whether that's good, bad, or anything in between. Just do that over time and you're going to start to establish that trust with them. So it's definitely not easy, but it's the thing that I think is probably most critical within our churches right now.
And sometimes that helps me to remember, like, not think of like kids as like little test subjects that don't think like us. Like, I'm curious for you, Josh, like, what are the things that Christian leaders do that build trust with you?
That build trust with me, like between me and a youth ministry leader?
Or just you and your pastor? Like,
Oh,
when you think about just your life, like you and like leaders in your life, like, what are things that they've done that you're like, man, that made me really trust them more?
yeah. Yeah. It's a good question. I'm thinking to like, okay, so the lead pastor at my current church, his name's Tito. Our church is Riza in Ypsilanti, Michigan. And the other day, he just called me up like out of nowhere, and he was like, "Hey, just want you to know, I'm thinking about you. Just want you to know that like you and your wife have been on my mind and on my heart," and was just like inviting us to like pray for things. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, you were just like randomly thinking of me. It's like, even like those things, like, the amount of times that I know, like for me personally, that I will think of a student or I will think of a youth ministry leader throughout our country. And like, I'm like, oh, I hope they're doing well. Like, tell them that you're thinking about them, those types of things. Let them know that they're on your mind. And I know like that gets hard. Like, the more students that we have coming to our ministries, the harder it's like, I'm supposed to text like, 70 students. Well, it doesn't have to be you, but there should be someone in your ministry that you've empowered to make sure that every student is getting that text. Every student is getting that confirmation that they're being thought of, that if they don't show up, man, something that like we hear from, something that like data has pointed to over and over is that young people want to know that if they don't show up, that they were missed. So like something that we used to do in our youth ministry all the time was we would take attendance, not for the sake of like taking attendance and like knowing the number, but because we were like, we want to know what students weren't here. So because that's an opportunity to let them know, not a, hey, where were you? Explain to me why you missed my program, but a, hey, just want you to know, hope you're doing well. We missed you. Hope to see you soon. Hope you're doing well, like that type of a thing. And students respond to that stuff, knowing that their absence was noticed. So,
And I think people do. I was at a coffee earlier this week with a couple that I'm kind of talking to about serving on our youth team. Yeah, just an initial kind of like, hey, want to get to know you because they just started coming to the church about 4 or 5 months ago.
yeah.
And they came over from another really large church that a lot of people probably listening to this would know of. And one of the things that, and that's not anything against that church or whatever, but I think it was revealing to what you're saying. They said that they hadn't been there in 5 months, and they got a text from one of the pastors like, "Hey, would you guys be interested in serving with kids?"
Mm,
And they're like, they just texted them back like, "Hey, I appreciate it, but we haven't been to church there in 5 months.
mm,
You
mm,
didn't know that."
mm.
So I'm just, as a challenge maybe to anybody, like, to that, like, you should know if a kid
Yeah,
hasn't been there in 5 months, because like
for
that's
sure.
that's the shepherd's heart.
Hmm.
Like, to know, like, hey, these are my sheep, this is my flock, I know where they're at, like, and these are, for, and every church has a different stance on membership, not membership. How does that work with kids? I don't really know. It's complicated, but like, just to like, the best use of your time, I
Hmm.
believe genuinely, is going to be, and I feel this, and I've been reminded, and I've been so thankful for the team that I'm on, of like being mentored by, pastors who are, our church is very strong, like, on shepherding and, care,
Yeah.
of just being really dialed into, like, knowing who's there and who's not. And like you said, just being personal. I think, like, if you're like, am I supposed to text 70 kids? I'm be like, that's going to take 5 hours. And I'm like, and that's going to be the best 5 hours you spent all week.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that like in general, like we just see like something that I'm grateful for, that like, again, like, going back to like, before COVID and after COVID, some things that haven't shifted are like the things that we all like, naturally long for. And the things like we just want to be true about our life, that we want there to be able to be like, relationships that we can trust. We want to know that we belong somewhere. We want to know that we have purpose in the places that we're at. We want all these things that, like, when you look at it, it's all things that are like pretty descriptive of the kingdom of God. And it's just like a callback to like the fact that like all of these young people, even like, before they have a relationship with Jesus, like they're longing for the kingdom of God and they just don't realize it yet. And it's like, it's up to us to make sure that like we can really cultivate those spaces where they can grow and develop and be like nurtured into the kingdom, and make sure that like, the spaces that we're providing are really like giving them those like authentic encounters with Jesus, that are not just like, the in a moment of a really cool worship song that like, I felt like, tingly because like, the chords all went in the right progression. But like the moments where it's like you look back on and you're like, that was a moment when I knew that like Jesus really met me. And that was a moment where like I felt like, like God really spoke to me in this way about whatever that is. Like that's something that like that really is like the one thing that like we're good at, and we're set up to like make sure that students can understand what that looks like. And we have the tools within churches to create those types of like moments for them, and to help them like understand like what does it look like to actually hear the voice of the Lord. How do you, like, what does that actually look like? And man, the amount of youth ministry leaders right now that are like, I really want to teach I really want to teach my students how to hear the voice of the Lord, but man, I'm struggling. I'm struggling to hear the voice of the Lord. I'm struggling to discern what that sounds like right now and how to obey the voice of the Lord, let alone how to teach young people how to do that also. Those are the types of things that like, man, at Alpha, like we're so passionate about that. That's why like, we're taking like, youth ministry leaders to our friends who are so good at that stuff, because we're like, it's so important that we're able to like hear and obey. And we're not going to be able to hear and obey if we can't literally like hear and decipher and discern the voice of the Lord, and then make that something that is prominent within our youth ministries. Those are the types of things that are building that kind of like, that kingdom culture, that kingdom mentality within our ministries that young people are longing for. And if we give them just like a simple taste of it, dude, they're in like all the passion in the world like comes from that. All the moments when we're like, you no longer have to go to a student and say, will you please go tell your friends about Jesus for me? It's like, give them a glimpse of what it looks like to really encounter the Lord. And they're going to be like, what do I say? What do I say when I go tell my friends about Jesus? Like, how do I do this in the right way? If it's cool, I wanted to like share with you real quick. There was like more of like a couple more of like our studies that we did, was we saw that 85% of students were more confident in their own faith after having a faith conversation with a friend. And of those 85%, 65% of them said that they were eager. That was like the word that we keyed in on, is that they were eager. They weren't even just like, yeah, I'm open to it. Like they were like, no, line them up for me. Line my friends up because I want to go tell them all about Jesus. But like that only comes from them having that actual encounter with Jesus themselves, and us actually being willing to empower them, equip them, give them the tools to go do it. And that is so stinking hard right now. it's like, I really don't think that it's ever been harder, because in the midst of all of us losing control over the last few years of ministry and understanding what it looks like to, again, like be successful in this space, what do we all want to do? We want to grab on to whatever we know is true. We want to grab on and just like take a hold of control. And what we're saying now is the way to like really continue to make sure that the young people in your community are hearing about Jesus is you have to like relinquish that to a 12-year-old boy to go to his school and to tell his friends about Jesus. Like, that sounds hard. It sounds messy. It sounds like you're probably going to get some phone calls from parents and maybe even some leaders at your church who are like, do you know what just happened? And it's like, you know what? It's worth it. If that's what we're doing right now in order to help young people experience the goodness of God and to create kingdom culture within our churches, like, it's absolutely worth every phone call that you might get where some 12-year-old messed up theology and you got to like maybe like rework a little bit of stuff. But that's the stuff that like right now we're really excited that we're seeing so much of that eagerness. So the more that we can continue to empower youth ministry leaders to empower their young people,
Yeah.
I think we're going to start to see a shift in what's happening in youth ministry in the country.
So how does Alpha do that? I would love just for a few minutes here, maybe before we wrap up together, just talk through like maybe you're a youth pastor, like I really need to have some train tracks laid out for me on how to do that. I know that's what your organization is all about. I've known a lot of people have gone through. I've never personally gone through an Alpha course, so I'm a little curious myself for taking kids through one. I'm familiar with some of your materials, so just talk me through it, just like you would anyone. I mean, like, what does that look like if I'm a student pastor and like I want to do that? I just maybe don't necessarily know how. And how could Alpha come alongside and really help lay some of the programming out for you, the curriculum, and talk through that sequence of taking that concept and turning it into a reality in my youth ministry and in the schools around me?
Yeah, I think that like the most important thing that people know is that, okay, in youth ministry, it's really easy for us to like get in like that weekly grind of like, I've got to have something to talk about next week. I've got to like figure out Sunday is always coming. I've got to put the plans in place in order to make sure it's taken care of. And when you hear free curriculum, you're like, oh, heck yeah, man, that's going to get me through the next quarter in order to like, and I don't
sign me up.
Yeah. And look, I'm gonna be so honest. Like, we know that there's so many youth administrators that are like, you guys really saved my budget. And we're like, that's great. I'm happy that was the win for you. We think that there's like such a bigger win for you. And the big thing here is that like, we tell people that the tool of Alpha, like, it is that it's a tool, and it's something that if used the right, if used just like the basic way, it's going to provide you with free content, which great. If used the right way, it could transform your culture into that kingdom culture type of mentality that we're talking about, where students feel like they can trust the people who are there, where students feel like they can like be open about the curious questions and can have those curious conversations with their friends and like be developed into that relationship with Jesus, where we tell youth ministry leaders it's so much more important to take this posture of like being interested in your students opposed to being the interesting person in the group. Like, when they're talking about something and in your mind, you're like, this is so weird. And I just don't know what to say about you being absolutely fascinated with Pokemon Go. Like, you better go download that app and catch a Charmander with them. And like, just be so interested in their life. Don't be interesting. Don't try to convince them of the things that you like. Be interested in what they're doing. Trying to like really shape that culture. Like, dude, there's like, multiple weeks of different, like, series. Like, we start with like, the basic building blocks of like, who is Jesus? Like, what is faith? What's going to happen? Like, life after death, like all of those types of things. And it starts very, very entry level and slowly works them into like some of the, like the deeper things in life. It is really, in my opinion, as someone who I don't think that I said this yet. I didn't know what Alpha was the entire time that I was working in youth ministry. I had to actually start working at Alpha before I heard anything about Alpha. And I was like, okay, this is where I'm at. This is what it is. And I'm so mad that I didn't know about it while I was in youth ministry, because I'm looking back and I'm like, this could have been a game changer for me in so many of the different contexts that I was in so many different seasons. So really, it's a culture curating product that is going to help people really put those pieces in place. There's lots of trainings. There's lots of additional resources. There's lots of ways that we're helping you to set up like, student leaders. There's ways that we're helping you go like even one step further after you do an Alpha Youth series. If you've got students who are like, cool, I'm here, I'm bought in, what's next? Like, we've got additional products that are available there. That's like the product side of everything. And then, of course, we're doing our best to make sure that we're constantly creating that network of youth ministry leaders who, at any point, if they're like, I just need someone to talk to, like, that's the thing we hear all the time from youth ministry leaders. They're like, you got to like, be a certain way when you're at work, at church. And like, we get that. And we provide coaches, we provide staff members, we provide people to any youth ministry leader across the country. And that's in all different types of spaces, whether you are a Catholic school teacher, whether you're the youth pastor at a megachurch, whether you are the youth ministry leader at a super small rural church, whether you are working at the Catholic, like any type of church is fair game. And it's this really like ecumenical approach to where we're seeing all of these really like beautiful like traditions and practices of following Jesus like come together and intertwine in ways that I think are like really expanding the worldview for so many ministry leaders about what it looks like to follow Jesus. I know that like for me, I was so like ingrained in the way that I was doing it. And I was like, this is it. This is the right denomination. These are the right beliefs. These are the right practices, the right traditions. And if you don't do it this way, well, I'll throw up some prayers for you and good luck when you meet the big guy, right? And and now like that entire worldview has just like completely like been shattered by seeing all of these really great ways that like youth ministry leaders from different parts of the country and from completely different contexts are coming together in these networks and rubbing shoulders with one another and learning so much. Like we're seeing like, people from inner cities learn from rural communities. We're seeing people from really diverse areas being like these voices that are speaking to more, less diverse areas about like, this is what it looks like to have your church represent your community. There are all these different ways that we're seeing youth ministry leaders really like sharpen one another just by being in network, being in relationship, and being in like constant conversation with each other. So that was a lot. All that to say, ultimately, Alpha is an evangelism video product. It's a video series that if you use with your students at its basic level, you're going to get good content for a quarter. If you use it to its fullest potential, it could completely transform the culture of your youth ministry, the posture that your students take when they come into that space to learn and to ask questions about Jesus and their faith, and could potentially transform the way that you as a youth ministry leader are approaching what it looks like to pastor young people in this generation. So all the potential in the world. Our big challenge right now is helping youth ministry leaders take it from that basic level of it's free content for a quarter to actually like taking it to that next step of saying, I want this to be a culture curating moment within my ministry.
Yeah. So what are some best practices for implementing that? Say I'm here, I'm a youth pastor. I want to take your content and I want to integrate it into what we do.
Yeah.
But I don't know where it necessarily fits. Is it like going to be the sermon series and all of our small groups, regardless of where you at, are going to go through it? Or have you seen best practices be more, hey, we're going to pitch a workshop and it's going to be a separate event at a separate time, or maybe a mixture of those? Would love to maybe hear just a couple case studies, a couple examples of that, just to give some context for anyone listening that's really curious about taking what you guys offer in the product and implementing it into their ministry.
Yeah, for sure.
Not sure how.
Yeah. No, that's so good. So we just looked this up. It was something like over 80% of people who first run Alpha Youth, they do it just like whenever they normally meet for their student ministry. So if you're meeting on a Sunday morning alongside of normal church services, they're implementing it there. If they meet on a Wednesday night, they'll do it there. And that's totally fine. We tell people that like one of the best ways to do it is to just initially integrate it into what your normal rhythm is. However, again, taking it from just a product to like that culture curating thing is where you go into that first round and you've already got some students that you've queued up and said, hey, I want you to go through this because you're going to enjoy it. It's going to be fun. You're going to like learn things. It's going to give you language, but also go into it with eyes and ears being ready, because I think that you're capable of doing this and using this product at your school next, in a few months after we finish it here. And students are like, wait, what? You're going to give this to me? And so, yeah, we're going to give it to you. And you're going to go use these videos with your friends. And like, we hear stories about students who are like, after football practice, every Tuesday after it's done, they huddle up and they sit around a phone and they watch the Alpha Youth series. And then they go through all the different portions where it's asking them
Wow.
questions about life, faith, and meaning. And then before you know it, this youth ministry leader is like, there's a whole football team that just showed up to my youth ministry, and I don't know any of them, but one of my student leaders who just like went out there and did this, it like just brought them here. And now they're trying to figure out like, what are they doing with, again, these students who just have this raw faith, these really open-ended questions where they're just like, I'm so curious, I watch these videos, what do I do next? And to be ready for it. So using it in your space the first time, great. We tell people like, there are multiple different ways to do it. So like, we hear about some churches that are like, we're going to equip small group leaders to where they're going to watch it in small group. And then within small group, they're going to say, hey, go invite your friends to do this because we're going to do it again. The churches that we see being the most successful as far as like, creating that type of kingdom culture where it's very like evangelistically positioned. And because it's like, so evangelistically positioned, they're also at the same time, like seeing that it's not just a focus on evangelism, but because they're empowering students to go have these conversations, discipleship is happening at a rate that goes beyond what we could if we were just standing up on a stage teaching them all these different things from scripture and hoping that it's like staying in their mind. We're seeing that like evangelism and discipleship is like two sides of the same coin, basically. And that if we can empower them and equip them with a tool to go be evangelistic in their communities, that discipleship is naturally going to happen as well. So all the way to where like what we've really noticed is at the sweet spot is that when youth ministry leaders are willing to say, all right, hands off the wheel, I'm giving this over to my student-led Alpha Youth. And when we hear the stories about students who are opening up their homes to have their friends come hang out with them once a week to go through this, when we hear about the students who are like coordinating things, like, there's a section in the Alpha Youth series called the Holy Spirit Weekend, where, man, that's just a topic that, if I'm being honest, like doesn't get talked about very much in certain areas of the church throughout the country. And there are students that are having encounters with the Holy Spirit that a lot of times youth ministry leaders are like, what do I do with this? They just encountered the Holy Spirit in a way that doesn't necessarily match sometimes even like the things that we teach at church on a Sunday morning. Like, what do I do? And we're like, it's okay. We're like, we're here. We'll support you. We'll walk you through some of this. So yeah, getting them to that place where we can continue to empower and equip young people with the right tools to go reach their friends for Jesus. When we get to that spot, we've got stories of people who they're like, well, I had one friend who brought me to Alpha, so I did Alpha for my friends. And then one of my friends in that group did Alpha for their friends. And these youth ministries that used to be like, a couple of students, all of a sudden they're like, we have over 100 students who just showed up, and it's all these students that we just met within the last couple of years because we really empowered our students with this tool. And they went and shared Jesus with their friends. And now their friends are here and they're hanging out, and we just get to continue the conversation where every week we're just creating trusted spaces where they can be curious about their faith and continue asking questions. And if we're setting it up right, we'll just keep on providing a space where we can do our best to not even provide them with the answers, maybe sometimes occasionally provide them with the answers, but more than anything, just keep letting them be curious and keep giving them that trusted space where they can keep growing in their faith.
I love that. Well, Josh, any ways that people can get in contact with you, get access to Alpha resources, and also, just a chance for you to maybe plug and talk a little bit about some of those community networks. I know that's the entire purpose of this podcast, is to help provide some resources to help in connection, do some coaching with pastors listening, if it ever makes sense. I would love, that is one of my deepest passions, is just coming alongside and encouraging. That's inherent in the name, of this ministry and what I'm trying to do with it as well. But I know that that's a big part of what you said that you guys do. So how can people get connected with you? Maybe follow up with you. And maybe they're like, hey, I'd love to implement Alpha. Maybe I'd love to get on a call with you to help talk through how that works, or someone on your team. How can people get access to your stuff and stay in contact with you moving forward and get plugged into the Alpha network?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm assuming you've got like show notes and stuff. So I can send you, all the direct links so people can just click on in the bio and all that stuff. But quick, easy ways. So my email is joshpenwell@alphausa.org. Always happy to get an email from someone and to connect. If you go to the website, the website is alphausa.org/youth. All of our products are on there. It's completely free. All we're going to do is ask you for your name, your email, and I think like the state that you live in, and then we'll just email you all the products for free. We've got multiple new resources and products that are going to be dropping on there throughout this year. We've actually got the brand new Alpha Youth series that is currently in production. This is the third iteration of that, and it's specifically geared toward later Gen Z and early Gen Alpha. Super excited. We're starting some research specifically on Gen Alpha this coming year, which is going to be great. As far as like
when that comes out, we'll have to get you back on and maybe share some of your findings.
Oh, for sure, man. We would love that. As far as like, getting connected with some of these networks, we've actually got a lot of our coaching stuff that's going to be rolling out later on this year. That's going to be a more formal, like, go on the website, tell us where you're from. We'll get you connected to a coach. At the moment, we've got a couple of like events that are happening. One is called the Alpha Youth Collective, where basically we just say like, hey, we know it's important to bring youth ministry leaders together. We tell people all the time that like, when we ask what's something that's beneficial to you, we often hear, when I get to connect with other local youth ministry leaders, and we're like, oh, that's great. How often does that happen? And they're like, well, that's actually not something that like I'm necessarily held accountable to. So whenever like, the schedules get busy, that's one of the first things that gets cut. So we've got a few of those coming to San Diego, Portland, Seattle, and San Francisco in the next couple of months. That's all on the website as well, alphausa.org/Alpha Youth Collective. And then the thing that we're really excited about, that anyone who's listening, that I think it has the potential to be like really transformational. We're starting a brand new tour that's going to be starting this fall, where the entire idea behind it, like, it's so new. This is actually the first time that it's being talked about publicly. It's all been like behind the scenes. So Ryan, you get the exclusive. Okay. Is that we're doing a conference that's specifically geared toward bringing youth ministry leaders and senior leaders together, because we often hear that youth ministry leaders will go to a space, they'll get like filled with all this encouragement, all this inspiration, all these ideas and strategy. And then they have to go back to their church and they have to basically like try to convince or like cast vision well enough to their senior leadership to let them do the thing that like we just told them about. And sometimes it doesn't go well. And then other times, we do lots of stuff for senior leaders as well, and they'll get filled with inspiration and all this stuff. And what we hear from youth ministry leaders is that sometimes those senior leaders, when they come back, they're like, hey, this is what we're doing. And the youth ministry leader is like, whoa, what? I'm feeling whiplash right now. So we think it's really important to bring those two leaders together, have them sitting at the same table, talking about the same things that are happening within their church and within the world around them, and then sending them home back to their church together on the same page, so that they can be working together and start working against these like youth ministry, senior ministry silos that we all know have existed for far too long. So that's going to be starting next fall, and we're going to be going to 10 to 12 cities throughout the US over the next 12 months beyond that.
Wow.
So all the details for that will be on the website soon. Did I hit everything? All the ways to like connect and all the things coming up?
I think so. Of course. Right. I mean, and I'm sure if they've got any questions, they can reach out to you via your email and if you're on Instagram and all that stuff. So
and I'll make sure I'll give you my my Calendly link also, so you can like drop it in there. So if people just like want to set up a quick 30-minute call or something, it's super easy to do that. And we've got lots of resources and stuff that I'll send you those as well. So if anyone's interested in any of like the data that we were sharing in here from those, like the Open Generation study or the Reviving Evangelism in the Next Generation study, I'll give those to you also, so people can get access to all of those.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Josh, just for taking some time and just encouraging me, inspiring me in just that work of sharing the good news of Jesus Christ, right? Like I think about, I don't know where we are in human history and when the return of Christ will be, or if we're in the last days, or where we are. And that's a whole nother episode, right?
Yeah,
with some smarter people than me.
That's not for me. I don't want that one.
But I know until then, the mission's the same: to go make disciples of all nations, to take the good news, and to be, just as Paul says, hey, that blessed are the feet of those who carry the good news. And so thank you for doing that. I pray that God blesses you for the ministry that you're doing, the encouragement that you're bringing to youth pastors everywhere, and the just that the multiplication side, that it starts small, through conversations here and resourcing there, but that's the kingdom of God, right? It's like a mustard seed that starts small and then multiplies into something greater than we could ever imagine. So thank you for your service to do that, and for coming on to encourage me and everybody listening. So I pray that this bears some really good fruit for you guys and just for the kingdom. So thanks for your time, man.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for the invite, man.
Of course. Thanks.